The DCEU was one of Zack Snyder's most ambitious projects in his whole directing career. His departure from the project was welcomed by some and undesired by others, making Zack Snyder's legacy become quite questioned, both in favor and against his case. 2 years afterwards, fans and artists like Gal Gadot, Ben Affleck, Jason Momoa, and even Zack himself became part of a movement called Release the Snyder Cut, which implored Warner Brothers to release Snyder's version of the Justice League, a film that was released as a version that had to be partly directed by Joss Whedon's after Zack's exit, and became a Frankenstein of sorts. But you know that story already. The movement won, and Zack Snyder got the second chance he deserved, and now, in 2021, he released the Snyder Cut. We believe in Zack Snyder's vision, and actually joined the movement with our Twitter and Instagram accounts, and even wrote an article defending Zack Snyder's legacy in the DCEU, which had positive feedback from our followers. While Zack's work isn't perfect and has room for improvement, his originality and risks are things that nowadays are desperately needed in Hollywood, where unoriginal remakes are flooding theaters and streaming services alike, aiming for a nostalgic cash grab with carbon copies of previous material. But before we dive into a review of the Snyder Cut, we wanted to talk a little bit about Zack Snyder and his impact in the world of the DCEU. If you want to jump directly into a review, you can go directly to this minute mark right here. Perhaps no other medium of characters, settings, and plot threads are as flexible and open for creativity as the world of comic books. Comic book characters are almost like guided blank canvases that let creators, writers, and directors play with many different possible what-if scenarios, outcomes, changes in personalities, and more. With this in mind, Snyder didn't hold himself back when presented with the opportunity of telling his take on the story from very old and loved characters like Batman and Superman. Snyder's vision was one that seeks to humanize and ground the godlike characters in order to present them as more vulnerable and prone to more realistic human behavior, mistakes, and emotions in a rather complex and globalized setting like the 21st century. His goal was to break the sometimes one-dimensional take of other iterations of the superheroes and present them in a world in which DC's heroes are more vulnerable than ever before, presenting them also in a world where they don't always make the right choices, but then fight towards correcting their mistakes and affront the consequences of their actions. This was a risk Zack took and owned, that received backlash from some of the most purist fans of DC. Some of these risks include the decision of Superman to kill Zod, and Batman's dark turn to become a morally broken person with an unempathized relationship with murder after the terrible loss of Dick Grayson, the first Robin. Sometimes these risks do pay off, and sometimes they don't. We're looking at you, Martha Moment.
Save Martha!
Zack Snyder's legacy can be strongly felt throughout the remains of the DCEU. Snyder's movies are mostly known for its beautiful imagery, and the DCEU is no short of spectacular shots that resemble a live-action comic book. This artistic style was presented in Man of Steel, and then it permeated itself in the rest of the films, which had some of the most iconic shots of our favorite heroes. Later, this same style and combination of longer than average takes, editing and framing, can be seen in later films that were directed by others like in Wonder Woman and Aquaman, where the complexly choreographed action set pieces, the use of camera work, and the comic book art style were directly inspired from Snyder's groundwork in the DCEU. Whedon's Justice League, in turn, felt like a product that didn't fit at all in the world that the DCEU had built. All the character building made in previous films was actually not taken much into consideration and looked more like a fresh set of characters rather than progressively developing the characters we knew from the previous films. Thankfully, 2 years after the movement became mainstream, the Snyder Cut is out there for everyone to watch, and it brought some levity and coherence to a story that was one of the most expected films of 2017, erasing the previous version from the timeline of the DCEU for good. So now, let's move on to our review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And we did it! We finally watched Zack Snyder's Justice League, and man, was it worth the wait. As you watch the 4-hour-long film, You immediately see the differences between this and the previous version, whether it's in the order of the events, a new score and soundtrack, the use of different takes, or the use of many different lines and added scenes. Even the visual aesthetic feels different and more in line with what we have seen before in the previous DCEU films. One of the main differences of Zack Snyder's Justice League is the complete change in tone. The theatrical release made such a huge effort to match the lighthearted tone of Marvel that made the heroes look as if they were in a place they didn't belong. And that holds true. That film wasn't part of the universe where they first resided. Superman was one of the victims, as he was one of the main characters with reshoots to make him warier of civilians and closer to the symbol of Superman, rather than a man who just came back from the death and will most probably have some inner rage because of it. However, the main victim of this was Batman, one of the most serious and respected superheroes of all time that had such a different use and personality in Batman v Superman, was reduced to becoming the punching bag of jokes. Thankfully, Zack Snyder's Justice League corrects this. Batman is no longer the butt of the joke, and now has a clearer arc with more solid motivations that aren't shadowed by the unrealistic quirks of the last film. In contrast, this film is funny only when it needs to be, so it organically balances out the darker tone of the film. In a sense, this film returns to the tone of Batman v Superman, Man of Steel, and Wonder Woman, and realign the DCEU into Snyder's original plan, where we would most probably get to watch his version of the Injustice storyline merge with Darkseid's invasion of Earth. Zack Snyder's Justice League is also way more violent, and we liked it. The gore and the added violence added much more needed weight to each and every punch, and felt ad hoc to the darker tone that the DCEU usually has, making the fights become way more brutal, which also felt as if they were better choreographed and shot. And that's another point that Warner wanted to stay away from before. Thankfully, they understood that being different than Marvel isn't bad. Marvel is awesome and has given us plenty of amazing cinematic experiences, but it is its own thing and it has its own style. DC needed to learn that they too can have their own style and be successful, if written correctly, of course. We as an audience don't want carbon copies of what's already proven. There are enough remakes as it is. Even though the core of the plot of the Justice League is still the same, its context and implications of where this plot is aiming towards is drastically different. It allows the film to give everyone a sense of purpose and really develop some chemistry that the previous version lacked. This in turn also allows many of the film's moments to feel earned rather than rushed, and therefore click with the thematic elements that Zack wanted to transmit, which the previous version only hinted at. It's safe to say that Zack Snyder's Justice League is a love letter to DC's lore and mythology, and a way to retell a story as best as Snyder can. He did this by fleshing out the rest of the characters and by giving the audience a bigger insight into the backstory and mythology of his world in the DCEU. The film managed to add more emotional weight to every aspect of it, and in turn correctly developed each character. It gave many, like the Amazonians, Lois, and most importantly, Cyborg and the Flash, their well-deserved time to shine and feel more important. Even the villains felt more grounded and emotionally motivated. One of the biggest changes versus the theatrical release comes in the story of Steppenwolf, who has an extra layer of emotional depth. The return of using the original design, together with his added motivation, makes him feel more menacing when he's on the screen. Yet, he also feels more leveled. His quest for the mother boxes isn't as easy as last time, and the heroes aren't as heavily overpowered by him. Also, Steppenwolf now invades Earth in an attempt for redeeming himself in the eyes of Darkseid, who he betrayed many years ago, causing his exile. Last time, he was just an evil alien with an appetite for conquest, but now, he is desperate to return home and pay his dues with his master. Now, don't get me wrong, this in any way made him become one of the greatest villains in film, but it did build his case of becoming a good enough villain for a Justice League film, and as an entree for Darkseid, who takes up the titular role as the main villain behind Earth's invasion and warms him up for his eventual arrival as he searches for the anti-life equation. And boy, what a rush of emotion I felt when watching Darkseid for the first time and him battling the heroes of old.
Ah, chills. Literal chills.
This is the film that the DCEU fans needed and deserved, and was the one that was needed all those years ago back in 2017. Justice was served for these characters and Snyder's vision and legacy. And the film isn't perfect, and it still has some issues in its plot and its ability to make the audience really connect and truly emote with the characters. But it's still a very engaging story that features a complex plot full of interesting setups and character building. Snyder's Justice League can lead up to a very interesting story coming forward, thanks to the rich world that Snyder created and teased with its dark and complex ending. That is, if Zack, Warner, and the cast want to return for it. Only time will tell. If this film becomes a great success, then we will most probably see the rest of what appears to be a great story. And now for the final score, 8.5 out of 10. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Also, be sure to check out our social media, our site, and the other videos in our channel.